Welcome to Retro Scale Modelling. This is part 5 of Moebius's Battlestar Galactica Colonial Viper scale 1 to 32. In this part I'm going to be concentrating on the engine, assembling it and doing some of the painting. So let's jump into this and see how well I get on. So to begin with, I'm putting a little bit of detail on the fuselage. So for this I'm using Tamiya's XF56 metallic grey, and I'm just lightly brushing this colour over the raised detail that you see here. Now I turn my attentions back to the engine. So this was dried overnight, and it's time to paint in some of the markings. Now, as I said in previous videos, there's actual decals for this, but I've decided just to paint in the markings. But because of that, obviously there's a lot of masking tape involved. Now, as I said before, I'm painting in the details and not using the decals. The reason for that is it gives me more control over the weathering process. Also, the bonus action as well, if when I lift the tape up, any of the paint comes with it, that's going to add a little bit of chipping effect. This is why I haven't varnished the paint. I went over that slightly in the previous video, but I can tell you now, when I lifted this tape off when I was done, I didn't get any chipping. I was a bit disappointed in that. When you don't want it, you get it, and when you do want it, you don't get it. Just one of those things. Now this masking tape I'm using is just your normal Tamiya masking tape. There's other brands out there, of course. I'm using my little jig to cut off very thin strips of tape. Now, the thinner the tape, the better. This allows me to follow the contour of the engine. As you can see, it's this sort of pyramid shape. So there's a lot of curves and bends that the tape has to go around. And because of this, it takes a lot of perseverance and time to do it, but it is worth doing. I suggest doing one part at a time and making sure it's securely on before moving on to the next part. If you do have a big piece of tape like I have here and it curls up, it can be a little bit frustrating, but feeding it around the contours in one go is sometimes better than just using tiny little bits also. So these are the two things you have to bear in mind when you're masking something like this up. Do I do it in short little bits and make it a little bit easier to place on, or do I do one continuous part and then just cut and trim? And it all comes down to what you're comfortable with doing. There's no real right way or wrong way to do this. Also, a good way to approach it as well is have a look at the area you want to mask off and use the natural markings on the part to guide your tape, so then you've got a clear roadmap how you're going to place it on. The added difficulty with this masking also is that the band of colour I'm putting in has breaks in it, little gaps, so I'm having to use even smaller parts to create them. And this is where the jig that I'm using comes in handy. I can cut off tiny sections of the tape on the jig before placing it on. So you can see that the piece I'm lifting off is very, very small, but that's the exact same size that I need to create the pattern. Map of the tape location, I painted over it with Rivet Colour 371 light grey. This is the same colour obviously as the fuselage. Now this coat doesn't have to be thick, it can actually be quite thin, because all it's doing is creating a barrier so that you don't get any paint plates when you put on the new colour. Now, because this pattern is going to be carrying on through to the wings or stabilisers, I need them to match up, so I'm just dry fitting everything so that I can then start masking them off so the pattern instead matches up. And I'll do the same process with the masking tape and get everything in place ready for painting. The only real difference here is I'm using thicker masking tape, but wider masking tape for the markings. But it's all essentially just the same. And once they're masked off, I can just take them away and get them prepared for painting. The actual pattern itself is a very simple pattern. It just takes a while to do all the masking. That's the only downside. Unless you love masking things up, then obviously you wouldn't find this bit tedious. I do find this a little bit tedious with all the masking. And once everything's in the base coat, I can now put on the new colour. And for this, I'm using Rebel Aquacolor 30 Orange. Now, I'll have to be very careful here that I paint within the masking tape lines. Now, some of the masking tape is very narrow, as I explained, especially on the engine part. So I'm using a very small brush here to paint from the tape onto the actual surface that I need the paint to go onto. So as you can see there with the engine, the line is very thin on the actual curvature of the fuselage for the engine. The central slits are a larger area, but you still have to paint from the tape onto the actual surface, as I said, or you will get paint bleed. Now, if you do manage to go over your tape and onto the surface where you don't want the new colour, you can just paint over it. As long as it's not too thick, then it should be okay. If you do put it on too thick and it goes onto that surface, there's a good chance you're going to have to sand it down. And also, you don't want to do that because that'll just ruin everything. You would have to take everything back to the bare plastic. So place the fuselage to one side to dry. So I'm going on to the landing gear bay doors, and the outside of this is painted in the 371 light grey by Rebel Aquacolor. The inside will be painted a different colour, but I'll wait until all this dries first. Moving on to the weapon systems, and the barrels I'm painting with Rebel Aquacolor 91 steel. As you can see, the housing is in the light grey colour, the 371, which I've already painted in. So it's back to the other side of the landing gear bay doors, and here I'm using Tamiya's X34 metallic brown once more, and this is the same technique I use for the engines, and just putting down a base coat, laying over a very thin bit of the pigment over the raised areas really. And I'm also doing the same with the landing struts. Now, these have all been painted in a base colour of the 91 steel by Rebel Aquacolor. And now, once that was dry, as you can see there, I'm still starting to highlight the raised areas using the metallic brown. And I'll just hold them up to the camera so you can see the colour starting to come through. And now switching to Rebel Aquacolor 90 silver, and this is just to highlight certain areas on the struts, of very small areas that I'm putting this colour on. Then once it's all dried, I'm giving everything a coat of dark grey wash by Humbrol. Now, I generally don't use washes all that often, and when I do, I'll normally make my own, but I didn't have time to make my own in this particular build, so I'm just using one of the Humbrol ones. The dark grey is the one I use most of the time if I am going to use a wash. They are quite effective if you like that sort of finish. But the reason why I'm using them on the struts is because the wash will give it a dark metallic look with all the different colours coming through the wash. When you put these washes on, they look quite thick, but they actually settle down and all the base colours will start coming through once it dries. And I'm using the same wash on the inner part of the landing gear doors as well as the guns, and the housing as well. I'm slightly going over with the wash. And now the orange is dry, it's time to remove the masking tape. I should point out with the masking tape also, it's helpful if you leave a little lip of the masking tape bent over on itself, so you've got something to grab onto to pull the masking tape off. A few times I do forget to do this, and I have to push up the tape and hope that I don't damage the paintwork. But as you can see, the masking tape is coming off quite easily, and I'm getting the desired effect. If you do get any paint bleeds, I had one tiny little one. It's easy enough to sort out. I'm just painting over the little bit of orange. Because the paint's quite thin, the white covers off quite easily. Well, the light grey, not white. But it's worth checking to make sure you have the desired effect before you go into the next stage. So that's all the orange flash done. And then it's back to the outer part of the engine, and I'm using the Humbrol dark grey wash once more. I'm using quite a stiff brush here just to lay it down. And this is where I'll end part 5. So if you haven't done so already, why don't you check out the channel for my other builds. if you subscribe to the channel, make sure you hit the notification bell. That way you'll be kept up to date not only with this build but all my future builds as well, of course. Hit the like button, don't be afraid to leave a comment, and of course you can share the video. But for now, thank you all very much for watching. Bye bye.